are so many people out there who want to volunteer and find a way in which they can help.
We've got some brilliant people that have come out of the school system here in Attleboro.
You actually perform as an elected official the way people should.
There are no agendas. Nobody has any projects that they have to complete, but we're just sharing information.
Welcome to People It's Good to Know. I'm your host, John Davis, and today we're fortunate to have with us the Mayor of Attleboro, Cathleen DeSimone.
Hey, John.
Mayor DeSimone, thank you so much for being here with us today.
John, thank you for having me.
Now, you've been mayor now for a little under 2 years, is it?
Yeah, March 15th, I think, will be 2 years.
I think that's correct.
I took office in March of 23, yep.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have heard your name, but still may not really know very much about you and your background. You want to tell people a little bit about who you are and where you come from and how you got here?
Sure. Long story short, I've lived in the city since 1999, married with 2 kids who attended the public schools. Been long involved in the city in various capacities, serving on boards and commissions and other community groups. And then after the 2016 election, I got inspired to get involved more deeply. Ultimately ran for office in 2020, was sworn into the council in 2020, and really enjoyed that work. And then when former Mayor Hero said he was leaving, I had been thinking about running. It came a little sooner, but you never want to miss the opportunity as it comes to you.
Right.
So I jumped in, and here I am. More background is I worked in higher ed for several years. I'm an attorney. I work for the United States Immigration Service and some private practice. I've been a teacher. I've done a lot of things, but you know what's interesting, John, and you may agree with this, everything I've done helps me now.
Absolutely.
Connections I've made, relationships, it all matters because of my background, I view the nature of mayor as being a connector. It's bringing people together to share resources and maximize value.
Absolutely.
And I'm lucky to know a lot of people like you.
Yep.
And this one, hey, you should meet this one. And you put people together and magic happens.
Right.
So.
And that's what it is. I mean, the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city, and it's just like being the CEO of a corporation. You know, it's so much about pulling different people with different strengths together to get things done for the organization.
Yep.
I mean, you've sort of gone, it's like baptism by fire here. There's this one thing after another you've dealt with in your first couple of years.
Can I give you my wine list?
Yeah.
And WH, okay. Let me just recap.
About a few.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you, John. Okay, so I walk into office. Mayor Hero had left. When I took office as mayor after the special in March, I had no budget director. I had no director of personnel. Basically my right and left hand, right? What I did have was a powerhouse city auditor, Deb Gould, who's been with the city, and she helped me get through those first few months, and particularly preparing the budget. And the auditor did, yeoman's work. So that happened. In the interim there, I think we got them on board in the summer, and by September of 23, we had historic floods. So that happened, and South Attleboro got slammed, and downtown got slammed. That happened. Now, of course, we're at the opposite end of the spectrum. We're at a serious drought, and we've had droughts before, but this is a historical drought we're in. In that meanwhile, I've been trying to do other things in the city, pushing to get a new senior center, trying to be creative in solving that problem, pushing on a possible location for a future joint public safety. So trying to move the city along, but every now and then I get kicked backwards, So yeah, it's been a lot, some of which you would imagine.
But some you would know.
Some you're just like, are you kidding me right now? Yeah. No, going in as mayor, there are going to be some unknowns. Yeah. But then there are the unknowns that no one could have ever figured. Yeah. I'll tell you the one thing I underestimated, well, 2. Personnel's a big part of the job I underestimated, right? People, they come to work with their, challenges and issues and relationships and
you're only as good as your team.
Yeah, and so it's important work. I just underestimated kind of the time involved. And then I didn't think about emergency management. And we have, the Fire Chief LaChance is our emergency management director, but just emergencies. Like that's one thing you don't think about. Well, I'm going to be mayor, and if stuff really goes bad,
there's someone to deal with it. They don't realize that there are decisions you have to make.
I missed that one. But again, I think I have a pretty good skill set and all those relationships that I talked about. I think I'm fairly good at communicating, and I enjoy writing. So I think I'm good at messaging and getting information out. That's my strength. But I am definitely learning as I go. I don't care what you've done in your life, right? Nothing prepares you for this job. You know, until you get there, it's just, it's so much different. I just have a great appreciation for all of my predecessors. Wow. And we've been so lucky in the city of Attleboro. I know there's been mayors that have varied in popularity and in their different ways, John. But as far as I know, they've all been people of character and integrity who did their best.
We haven't faced the challenges that some other communities unfortunately have over the years, and we're lucky about that. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. Having a diverse background, you know, the number of things you've done in your life does help prepare you to be able to deal with a lot of the unforeseen things that are going to be new to anyone in that role. It's remarkable. Since it's timely right now, this whole drought issue, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Because I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are wondering, and a lot of information you'd really like to get to them, and this could be a good venue for that.
Sure. Thank you, John. So first of all, I would direct people. We had a really, what I felt was a successful community meeting 2 weeks ago at the high school. There was 70+ people and several staff members, and I went in expecting the worst. And hey, I'm elected. I signed up for it. People have a right to yell and scream at their government, and I was going to stand there and take it. My goal was to present information, but I also realized there are going to be people might not be happy. But the meeting went so much better than I thought. That my team did a great job of presenting accurate information, which is so important in this Facebook age.
Right.
And then the residents came up, and yes, there was some frustration and questions and suggestions. But I think everybody left there thinking, all right, this isn't good, but we have a better understanding of where we are. So I say all that to say there's a link, and AACS was kind enough to record the meeting. So you can view the public meeting on the AACS website or on the City Water Department website. We put a link. So I would drive people there. The Water Department website also has a lot of information about where we are and how we got here. But fundamentally, this is a situation. Attleboro has a surface water supply system, which means all of our water comes from reservoirs, which can be man-made or ponds, and streams, all of which are fed by rainfall. At the moment, we don't use any groundwater. We don't have ready access to it, so we are literally totally dependent upon Mother Nature, which in today's climate,
it's unpredictable.
It's kind of scratch your head like maybe this isn't great. So things kind of took a weird turn in the summer. You know, we had gotten all that rain in the spring. We were good. And then two things happened. The temperatures took off. We had a sustained heat wave. And one thing that I learned is that a sustained heat wave increases the amount of evaporation from a water body, particularly if it's shallow, right? Water evaporates. And that can amount to a serious amount of water. I'm not saying it's why we're here, but I'm saying that we might underappreciate.
Right.
When we had that 10 days of 90+ weather, that made a dent in the reservoir level. We did what we always do. The state water management permit requires us to impose the annual lawn restrictions. You know, you have to water before 9 after 5. We did all of that. We were also only operating, as you know, on one water plant. We have two. We were operating on one for a couple of years because the other plant was dealing with PFAS compliance issues. So we kind of went into this with one hand tied behind our back, which would have been okay in normal circumstances. But then the rain went away. I think we stopped having any really meaningful rain sometime in July. And then we had that sustained heat wave in early July, and things seemed to change kind of quickly. So I think we had the annual water restrictions in place. We increased them to level 4, which means there's no watering at all. That wasn't enough because the drought continued. So we started promoting several weeks ago indoor conservation because the outdoor measures weren't enough. And again, in the absence of rain, all of that is important, but it doesn't bring us water.
Right.
It saves what we have, but it doesn't replenish. And as I told the people at the meeting, we have to do two things concurrently. We have to minimize our daily use to save what we have and buy us time till our resources get replenished. So what we're trying to do now, the restrictions and the conservation, is to get us through to when the rain comes. And it's going to come. Yesterday we got a little more than an inch, which is great, but we're going to need several more days like that of inches of rain to get to a place where we're where we should be. So I hope that answered your question, but that's kind of how we got
well,
here.
my interest was allowing you to get as much information out to the public as possible, because, you know, unfortunately, too many people only know what they see on Facebook, and that is usually not very accurate.
No, and it's fascinating to me. I mean, Facebook, it's good, right? Because you can find a lot. You can throw questions out there, and I do like the idea of like group sourcing, that when you get a lot of people in a room, you can get a lot of information. However, sometimes that information is not always accurate, right? But I like the idea of crowdsourcing for answers. But if you want to know something about your government and what your government is doing, you're not going to really find it on Facebook. I'm not the kind of mayor, I'm not out there like...
Right, all the time, yeah.
Maybe I should do more, but what I try to say to people, if you want accurate information, call me or my office, email the water superintendent or the city planner or whomever you want to talk to, and go to the expert and get the information. But man, people just, I think they just want to throw their question on Facebook and get information, not really concerned about the source.
Yeah.
You know, well, so-and-so, you know, Chuck E. Cheese on Facebook says...
and then you run into the problem of...
There's no vetting of credibility.
People get a little bit of information that they're not even certain of, but then they make up a story that goes with it.
And it rolls.
And it rolls, and then it builds, and the next person adds to the story.
And it's remarkable to me how people in social media gain credibility. Like, I don't know who this person is.
Right.
They're just a person, and now they're the guru on X, or...
Yeah.
And we let them be. It's a fascinating world we live in where, and I guess I'm getting old, John, but we don't check sources or credibility. We don't do any fact checking. We just go with it until somebody, you know, disabuses us of that notion.
Yeah. Well,
man,
and we've seen how that now has evolved into, you know, even national politics. You know, prominent politicians today make statements that are completely
unfounded.
Yeah. But no one really ever calls them on it. When they do,
no, it's mind-boggling.
Just shrugged off.
It's mind-boggling. I had this conversation with my kids. I've got a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and we had this conversation. There was a video on YouTube about some guy who went to the border with Mexico because he wanted to see the situation. Just a guy. So he's got his video up there and he's making his comments, and my kids are watching. I'm like, who is this guy? I don't know. I said, well, don't we want to know about this guy? Why do we?
Right.
What makes us think he's telling the truth, that he's even there? And they had a very interesting take. Their take was, well, Mom, if he's not, people will call him out in the comments. So they not only crowdsource their news, they crowdsource credibility.
That's an interesting,
And wow, that is so different than the world I'm in.
It's a mindset different than how we grew up.
Yeah, someone will call him out, someone will correct him. It's almost like the Wikipedia approach, right? Although Wikipedia does some attempt at accurate information.
And then people adjust it as it...
Yes, and I was like, wow, that's so different. I happen to be a journalism major in college, so I have a little bit of appreciation for news the way it should be and used to be. But they're like, no, people will call them out. People who know something different, they'll call them out, and you know, the accurate information will come out. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a real circuitous route to hope that accurate information comes out. It's fascinating to me. So,
one of the again, we want to get as much information out to people as we can. One of the things that have been talked about recently, significantly, is the whole idea of developing a new senior center. Do you want to give us a little bit on what you've been working on, probably since the day you got elected?
Yeah, it started before. This started years ago with the former COA director, Madeline McNeely, who did the Aging in Place study, right, to talk about our senior population, what their needs and wants were in this situation. So that was kind of the beginning. And then that turned into a feasibility study for a new senior center. So this is our population, this is what they need and want, these are their concerns and complaints. This is what we have right now at the Larson Center and our programs. And this is where we want to be. So the city embarked on a feasibility study for a new senior center. I find one thing fascinating. I always interpreted a feasibility study, they didn't just tell you where something should be. I took it to, they're supposed to tell you whether you even need it, right?
Yeah, right.
Is there a
necessity?
And if you need it, is it feasible? Sometimes those questions
still kind of...
They get merged, they get confused. So we did a long feasibility study, which got interrupted by the special election. And it was determined that we needed a new senior center for our growing, because it is true that the seniors are the largest, fastest growing population in the Commonwealth and the country. And based upon the programs and services we had and what we wanted to have, we needed X number of feet. And when they looked at the various properties in the city and the space that was needed for the facility and the associated parking, it's amazing how much parking drives everything.
Right.
It was determined that the best location for the senior center would be the Highland Clubhouse at what used to be Highland Golf Course. And that the best way to do it would be the adaptive reuse of the clubhouse. So use what's there. It's good bones. There's like steel rafters in the building, and I'm sure you've been in there many times. It's still pretty solid.
In the day, there were a lot of events
Yeah,
to places.
I've been to that myself, and it's beautiful. I mean, although it's not a golf course anymore, Highland is a beautiful spot
Right.
in the city. So that came out as the #1 location, the adaptive reuse of the clubhouse. Great, okay. How much? Keep in mind, and you know this, when the government does something, you pay 3 times the price and it takes twice as long.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true.
Holy cow, and that's a whole nother story as to why that is. But the estimated price for the rehabilitation of the clubhouse as a senior center was around 15 mil, 14 something. We'll ballpark it up to around $15 million, which is a small amount of money.
And I doubt they can do it for that, but that's a whole nother
Well, that too,
story.
right? That's no guarantee.
Right, yeah.
So the first thing I did was like, that's a lot of money. Particularly now, you know, interest rates are back to where they should be. We lived in this zero interest rate
Right.
environment for 20 years, which was good, but also not realistic at all. And there's a great PBS special called The End of Easy Money that talks about the ramifications of living in a low interest environment for so long. That now that we're back relatively to closer to normal, 4%-ish, it feels like a lot. But I say all that to say, borrowing $15 million, I met with the finance team of the city, and they were like, not a good time, really not wanting to do that. The interest alone, which would come out of the general fund, would be close to $1 million, which is $1 million we can't do other things with. So I asked myself, it's a value proposition, right? It's not just what you spend, it's what you get for that money.
Right.
Right? You can spend $20 million on a senior center, and if you're only using it for 30 hours a week, is that really a good return on value? So I started asking myself value questions. First of all, it should be opened as much as possible, including weekends, serving more than just seniors, right? Maybe letting other groups meet there, et cetera. So I called a meeting with some folks and started this conversation about a value proposition. What can we do to make this as valuable as possible? I realized we need to get perhaps a doctor in there, a gerontologist, right? Because that would be a good service.
Yeah, something complementary to the senior.
Exactly. It's a value add. Let's have a screening. Okay. And then the conversation we went on, and then I'm like, you know what? It would be nice if we had people there too. Like, if we're going to put this building there and we need senior housing, could we put them together? So the idea was to possibly build a senior apartment building with a built-out space or a space for community programming for seniors in the building, in the community. That was well received by the people I talked to it about. I talked to a couple of developers off the record because that's a world I don't live in. And I know these folks have to make money. And I said, does this idea have legs? Would it be appealing to a developer to say, hey, this is a 5.5 acre parcel. Here's what the city wants, housing in a community space. No, you got to make money. Could both things happen? They're like, yeah, this could work. So when I realized it could work, I thought about it, did some field work with the COA director, Kelly Lee. We went on a field trip. We went to the Rehoboth Senior Center to see what's out there. And I decided to take a shot and ask the municipal council for permission to dispose of the land by lease. I wanted to do what's called a ground lease, which means the city continues to own the property, but we just lease out the opportunity for someone to have an apartment building there, right? To create and generate revenues from the apartments on the ground lease. I thought it was in the city's best interest to retain ownership of that 5.5 acres. I still do. So there was a lot of debate and discussion on the council, as you know, but they have basically given the opportunity to see if this idea goes anywhere. So we're going to be creating an RFP, looking for people to bid on this idea. Would you be interested in building apartments with a community space for it, and 5.5 acres in Attleboro? So I'm curious to see what we're going to get. I feel optimistic, but we'll see. But I say all that to say the idea just began with a simple value proposition. Yes, I can throw $15 million at it and check that box. We got ourselves a senior center.
Right. But, yeah.
But is that in the best interest of the taxpayers and the city in the present and the future?
Right. Yeah, I don't think people at all grasp the complexity of the things you're balancing. You know, I mean, it was
Yeah.
because when I was talking with this issue with the budget director, Mason,
Yeah.
and he was showing me the program he had where we were looking at, okay, if we borrow X amount at X rate,
Yep.
and he could adjust that by a hair this way, hair that way,
Yeah.
you would see the long-term consequences in our debt capacity.
Yeah.
And so, I mean,
It's a hit.
yeah, this isn't one of those things that just is willy-nilly tossed around.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some serious long-term
Oh, definitely,
thoughts.
definitely. And the people I talked to, several people thought it was a good idea. They appreciated, this is a creative way to solve the problem. We need a senior center. We need senior housing. The city doesn't have to borrow $15 million. So people are intrigued enough to see if it's going to go anywhere. And it may be that when we put the RFP out, we don't really get any viable bids, and I'll move on.
Right.
You know, there are other ideas I have. But I don't want, if you're not seriously considering options and ways to save money and be creative, I don't think you're doing the job right, right? I mean,
I would agree. You got to assess all your options, and you know,
Yeah.
if there's no merit to what's proposed, then it won't happen.
Right.
But at least you gave it a shot.
if you can do more and do better, you should.
Right.
You know, I mean, the politician in me would love to say, yep, $15 million, new senior
done.
center, got all those votes. But
Right.
I have to ask myself what makes the most sense for the city. I'm excited. I think this does. But it's very much a work in progress. So that story's not over.
And at the same time, you have the discussion that's coming back again about the police and fire
Yeah.
dispatch headquarters, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
Well, for the police department, I guess it's actually a whole new facility because theirs is just.
Yeah, yeah. So this conversation I learned has been a long time. The idea of a joint public safety complex, and you probably know
It
this.
was discussed the first time I ran for council 30 years ago.
yes, it's-
30 years ago, it was being
Yeah.
discussed then.
If
And at
only
that-
we had done it then.
And at that point, the police and fire would not agree to being in the same building. It's a
Man.
different time today.
Man, John, if we
but
had
in
done
those
it then.
days,
Yeah, would have been a fraction of the cost.
right? Yeah.
So I had heard when I took office, not only was there the COA, the Senior Center feasibility study out there, the Joint Public Safety feasibility study was floating around. And I learned that this idea had been kicked around for a while, and somebody finally talked to former Mayor Hero to like, can we at least have a feasibility study? Fine. So the feasibility study for the idea, and the idea of a joint safety complex is, again, maximize value, you know, combine resources. It makes sense in a lot of ways.
It's much more common today. You see it in
is.
other
A
communities.
lot of places are doing it. So it makes sense. It makes sense. The feasibility study was long. One of the challenges with this, John, is if we were to do this joint complex, is the footprint. I think the building alone, the footprint would have been about 100,000 square feet, and then you have associated parking for staff and equipment. So there were very limited options in the city where we could do it on city-owned land. Some options would have involved takings, which are never appealing
Never
to
easy.
folks. But the one option that came up and that I am pushing hard for is the reuse of the Ponson Reserve Center on John Williams Boulevard there, John Williams Street. So when thinking about it, I did some Googling and some research, and there's and I emailed our federal delegation. I think I started with Congressman Auchincloss, and his team told me about there's a thing called public benefit conveyance, where the federal government will entertain the idea of selling very cheaply at a discounted rate, or giving a municipality a federally owned property if it's going to be used for a public benefit.
Right.
I said, it will. So I submitted a request for a public benefit conveyance of the Ponson Reserve Training Center for the purpose of a joint safety complex. I think it's centrally located, as you know, easy access in and out. That is being considered by the feds. The challenge is the property is owned by the Army, and the Army is a whole nother entity.
Right.
They don't move quickly, and the building may have some contamination issues. So I think we have a very good shot at getting that property for free or very inexpensively. It just might take a little bit longer. And then when we get it, I don't know if they're going to keep the existing building, whether we could rehab what's there, or whether we do a knockdown do-over, but at least we'd have the perfect location at no cost to the city. And I should tell you that the feasibility study, not only did it suggest that location, but the price of this complex, as presented by the consultants, was $130 to $140 $1 million.
Right.
And that's a lot, and I think we could probably walk that back because what I'm learning about these feasibility studies, John, is they're like car salespeople.
Oh, yeah.
They'll gladly sell you the Cadillac when you could just use the Subaru.
Right.
So I'm going to go back and see what we can get for the Subaru
Well,
version.
the reality is that they work in conjunction with the developers.
Yeah.
They're trying to anchor you to a high price, and then they're going to negotiate their way down.
Yep.
It's business. But you've got to think, I mean, our debt service is about 2% of our city budget.
Yep.
Try to figure out how you make those numbers work. Those two things are in complete contrast with each other. So it would seem to me absolutely impossible to build a police and fire headquarters without an override.
Well, debt exclusion.
Yeah,
Like,
which in most people's minds is the same thing. A debt exclusion is a temporary override.
Right, for a specific purpose. And the thing that...
Like the high school.
Yeah, and the thing about a Prop 2.5 override, which to the best of my knowledge, no one's ever floated in Attleboro. Not yet, anyway, right? I
No,
don't
the
think
debt
we've even
exclusion for the high
tried.
school was the
Yeah.
only one that's ever,
And look, do I think that conversation should be had? Yeah. I think either that or the state needs to increase it to Prop 3.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a whole nother big story. I've had that conversation with people. That was a big mistake, yeah.
Somebody floated that idea, even if they went to Prop 3.
Right.
But anyway, that's not a topic that people are going to love, but
Or fully understand.
it's not sustainable. But debt exclusion, the thing that's appealing about a debt exclusion is that people know specifically what the funds are for and how long it's going to be. So that might be a little bit more appealing. So that, although we're not even close to thinking about financing, I think that might be the better way to go as the high school debt starts to kind of come down.
Right.
You know, there
Which
might
will
be
be
a
happening
point.
before we know it.
Yeah, there might be a point at which you introduce this idea of a debt exclusion for the new public safety complex, but that's years away because we don't even have the property yet. So, in the meanwhile, I do appreciate that our public safety folks need some improved facilities. So, I'm working with the fire chief to get. We own the annex building next to City Hall. The first floor of that, when the RMV, when their leases expired, I'd like to get that whole floor open up for our police personnel to use. And Chief Hegney said that would really help a lot and buy them time, give them some extra space. In terms of the fire department, I think there are some improvements we can do for them to buy time. So right now what I'm trying to do is figure out a way to spend some money to get us through until this, public safety complex eventually happens. So that's what I'm trying to do because some of their facilities definitely need improvement.
Right. Absolutely, and I think we're all in agreement to that. And for those who are saying that you're throwing good money at bad, you're just doing what your predecessors have done literally for the last 40 years.
Yeah, trying to figure a way forward.
Right.
I mean,
how to figure out to make that big step.
And it might be, frankly, let's say it might be that a new public safety complex is beyond our reach.
Yeah, possible.
I've had this conversation with other folks, and they've said, we could, for far less than $140 million, we could probably do great improvements for the police and fire situation. You know what I mean? They wouldn't have the dream, the ideal, which would be the joint public safety complex, but we could spend maybe half that amount of money and really give some decent improvements and somehow find a way to make their current facilities better. So that's also possible.
Something to be considered.
Again, it's a value question.
Right. Our time has gone so fast. You and I could talk for a week.
What?
Yeah, but we've gone through a half an hour conversation. I want to thank you so much for being here and informing people about some of the things that you're involved with dealing with on a daily basis. I'd love to have you back to talk some more because there's a whole bunch of things I'm sure you'd love to share with people that we haven't had a chance to. And so I'd like to thank you so much
John,
for being with us today.
thank you for the opportunity.
Anytime.
Thanks. Thank you, John.
And thank all of you for tuning in to People It's Good to Know. There are so many people out there who want to volunteer and find a way in which they can help.
We've got some brilliant people that have come out of the school system here in Attleboro.
You actually perform as an elected official the way people should.
There are no agendas. Nobody has any projects that they have to complete, but we're just sharing information